Well, here we are. Welcome to everyone. And we're very happy today for this Getting to Know You interview with Bob Maloney. And Bob, you have been here for, what is it, 9 years now?
About 8 years.
8 years. Okay. And it's about time we were getting to know you.
I don't know what to say about that.
So once again, welcome, Bob, to the this interview. And the purpose of the interview is, of course, so that we can begin more and more to get to know each other. And it's meant basically to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about yourself than most of us know. You're having a big birthday coming up on on August 15th.
Yes.
And what happened on August 15th, 1929?
I was born.
Very good.
That's what I was told.
Okay. And where were you born?
Rochester, New York.
Rochester, New York. And Rochester, New York is famous for a couple of things besides producing Bob Maloney. One of them is it's the home of Eastman Kodak, the big camera film place. And George Eastman was also a great fan of music. He was he was a philanthropist that supported music and the Eastman School of Music and Symphony Orchestra and so on. And you have some memories of that growing up, I believe.
I did. First, he was very good with his money in supporting a number of improvements in the state in Rochester, New York. Paid money to get areas cleared for what do I want? Parkland? Parks. Yeah,
Okay.
for parks. And he had several of those in town that were good size. I went to school on a piece of property, grade school on a piece of property that he had given money to the city to put in a park, and he did just that.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it a number of times.
Mm-hmm. And you went to Catholic high school, but you did not get into a Catholic grade school.
That's right.
And that there's a little story behind that, and the story behind it also tells a lot about how parishes were organized and how, shall we say, protective some pastors were about their own, shall we say, their own territory. Tell the story.
I had one brother, a couple of years older than I was, and Mom and Dad decided to build a house in this particular area of Rochester, northeast area, and they went over and took a look at the property and said, okay, put the building up, and there are a couple more, the homes up, there are a couple of more here and there in the neighborhood. And when it was all set, they moved in, and they were very happy until my brother got to be age old enough to go to kindergarten. And we found out that we had bought a house 2 blocks outside of the parish district. So I had to my brother and I went to public schools, which were a lot closer to home.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that I grew up half a block, actually right through the parking lot of St. Elizabeth's Church in Van Nuys. But I know that most of the parishes around there also had a school, and the pastors were as jealous of their particular territory and would not allow any shall we say, riffraff from those other parishes to come to the school. So
it's changed a little bit.
It's changed a lot now. For one thing, we don't have so many Catholic schools, and Catholic education is, in some instances, struggling a bit, but we won't really get into that. Any good stories about your Catholic high school time? You went to Aquinas Catholic High School in Rochester,
that's
right?
It was a boys' school. We had about 450, 500 boys for the 4 high school steps they had to take.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in one corner of the town, and there was a lot of busing that went on, and the Rochester Transit Company took care of all of us.
Wow.
Very good. Now, after you graduated from high school, you went to where did you go to college?
University of Pennsylvania. That's the one in Philadelphia. There's another university, Pennsylvania University. It's a state university up in the middle of the state of Pennsylvania. But the University of Pennsylvania is in Philadelphia.
You had a couple of distinctions there while you were at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. One had to do with the Newman Club.
Yes. I was very active in the Newman Club shortly after I arrived. I should mention that my brother also, 4 years ahead of me, went to the University of Pennsylvania also. So I knew a little bit about the campus and had been there a couple of times before I matriculated there.
Okay. And your brother's name?
Jim.
Jim. And Jim's gonna have a bit of a big role in somewhere in the future in your story, but we aren't there yet.
Which one?
Maybe he's got several roles. But at any rate, you were active in the Newman Club and
At Penn.
and your time there coincided with, some may be old enough to remember, in 1950, Pope Pius XII called the Holy Year. Every 50 years or so as a holy year. We may remember also that the year 2000 was a very, very significant holy year that was managed by Pope John Paul II. So, do you have any memories of what happened in 1950?
I do. I was very active in the Newman Club at Penn and did some work on the national program that the schools were putting together to bring American schools to Rome during that summer vacation, and for the work that helped the handiwork that some of it that needed to be done ahead of time, I was involved in, and I was invited to go with the group to Rome for that purpose.
So you went to you went to Rome, having organized that trip, and for the Holy Year ceremonies, and you got to meet somebody rather prominent there.
I did. I had a group of people that I was responsible for, and there were about 50 of them, and we had about 3,000 on the ship that we took to Rome and back, and I had a responsibility for about 50 or 60 of the classmates. And one of the girls advised it with good thought, came to me early and said, I have a medical problem and it's under control, and it would be serious if I got in trouble medically in Europe. But my father's a doctor, and he's written to and knew some of the doctors in Europe that could help her if she got into trouble. And sure enough, the day that we were going to see the Pope, she couldn't make it to join us, and I felt I had a responsibility to her to get her to the doctor who she had already contacted in Rome. And everything worked out all right, but I got separated from my group. And as soon as I could, I saw that she was taken care of and hopped in a taxi cab and went to the center of all things that day and made it just to the doors of the, what do I want to say?
Doors of the Basilica?
The Basilica, thank
Okay.
you.
Mhm.
I have a memory problem, by the way. I need help once in a while.
Yeah. Now, who doesn't? Anybody who doesn't have a memory problem, raise your hand. Okay, so you're in good company, Bob.
Where were, oh.
The Basilica of
The
St.
Basilica.
Peter's with the girl who had the medical problem.
And as I pulled up to the front gates, they were closing them, and the guard said, nobody else gets in. And I said, I got an emergency, and I had a red banner on my arm. And I asked him to be taken into the American group that was in the center aisle. And he said, I'm not sure I can do it. And I said, let's go find out. So he took me in, closed the door, and he took me down the aisle with only about 5 minutes to spare before the Pope came in. And I made it down the aisle and reported to the director of the group of this, 4,000 or 5,000 Americans that were there. And the guard that brought me down the aisle warned me, said, you got to get back up the aisle. And I had to do a couple of things. And he came down and he said, we can't get you back up the aisle. So the group that I was talking to was in the front line of the group of Americans. And before that, they had put in chairs for distinguished guests that the Pope would come around and meet. And that was the plan, but I had to climb over the initial barricade,
Barricade, yeah.
the barricade, and turned around, and shortly thereafter, since I couldn't go back up the aisle, a few minutes later, the Pope came around and turned to the people with the American group.
And there he was, and there you were.
There he was, and I just turned and started to put up my hand, and he took my hand and said, welcome. And I told him this was the American group, and he was very relaxed. It's like I really knew him, and I didn't. He said, where are you from? And I said, oh, this is the United States group. And he said, no, where do you live in the United States? And I said, Rochester, New York, upstate New York. He said, I know where it is. And I said, Your Holiness, I've never heard of you being in Rochester. And he looked at me and I said, you were on a train and stopped in Buffalo, is that right? And he laughed and he said, yes. And I said, I'll be there the next time and I won't let you get by on the tracks. He said, it's a deal. And I passed his hand along to the rest of the group that were lined up there. I got a kick out of it, and I think the Pope enjoyed the conversation.
So, which Pope was that?
Well, 12th, wasn't it?
Pius the 12th.
Pius the
Yeah.
12th.
Yeah, in 1950. Now, there's something else while you were in college that you described to me that I found absolutely fascinating. You traveled a fair amount, like 11,000 miles. And how did you travel that 11,000 miles?
I hitchhiked.
My goodness.
So you
Yeah.
hitchhiked
Yeah.
all through the time you were in college.
In northeastern United States, I was all over the place. And,
And your mother was quite worried.
oh, mothers were always worried, you know that. And I always had a way of calling home when I got, well, most of the trips were one-day trips. If they were two-day trips, I usually had somebody I knew midway that I was going to bunk up with, and then I could call home and let her know it was okay. And this one particular trip, I was going to Chicago, and she was worried that I would travel from University of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia and get to Chicago in the same day. And I told her not to really worry about it. She did.
That's what young men tell their mothers, right?
Yeah, I never had a bad encounter in all the time of it, because I probably take into consideration I was 6'2", and I dressed with a tie and a shirt and a blue jacket on and gray slacks, and it said Philadelphia on it, or wherever I was going, and everybody, that helped a lot.
So
getting
tell us
people.
about how you communicated with your mother when you got to Chicago.
Oh, I had said to my mother, I don't know these people I'm staying with very well. It was my fraternity that I was staying with. And I said, I don't know whether I can get a private phone or something. And she said, well, I'd really like you to call. I said, I have an idea. You remember the Breakfast Club?
Don McNeil
Don McNeil.
and the Breakfast
Remember
Club?
that? Every morning?
Yeah.
I heard it often enough to know what it was, and I said, Mother, I'll just go down and go to the show that he has in the morning, and he interviews people, and I'll figure out something, and you listen in Thursday and Friday. And she said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know till I get there. I went down early, make a short story. I was called and went up, and he interviewed me on the problems with hitchhikers. He said, you know, there's been an article in a magazine, and I had read the magazine, and I said, yes, I am aware of that. As a matter of fact, I've read it. He said, what did you think of it? I said, I thought it was well written from the driver's point of view, but they never went into any of the risks you have to consider as a hitchhiker. And he just turned to me and it said, have you had any problems? And I said, never. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, or whatever, however he addressed his people, he said, here he stands, coat and tie, blue. He looks like a college student, which he is, and he has a sign to where he's going. And he said, thank you very much. So
we have a celebrity
yeah,
on Don McNeil's Breakfast Club
Yes.
in the early 1950s.
yeah, and about 20 people called my mother.
Yeah. So
I was in South Bend, Indiana, to a football game a couple of years later, and I went to a cocktail party afterwards, and somebody said, my guest, it was a gal that I was knew, and invited me to the party, and she said, oh, somebody you'd enjoy meeting, here's Don McNeil. And I turned and said, we've met before, I'm the hitchhiker.
did he remember you?
He did. He said he did anyway.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh.
In fact, about a week after the trip from Chicago back towards home, I was picked up by a fellow that stopped. He drove by as if he was going to pass me by, and then he put the brakes on, but he didn't have any place to park, so he drove up to the next spot. He got out of the car and said, come on. I went, picked up my bag and ran down, and he said, where are you going? I said, Rochester, New York. He said, you know, I know who you are. And I said, oh? He said, yeah, you were on Don McNeil 2 days ago.
Okay, so let's get you out of college now.
That's good.
Okay, good. You started out as a pre-med student,
In college,
but
yeah.
you didn't like the sight of blood or something, right?
Well, my father was a dentist, and my brother was about to be an MD.
Okay, so
That was enough.
so then you switched to economics.
And I switched to economics in school.
But as soon as you graduated from college, it was 1951, and what did you do there?
For about 9 months, I had enlisted in the Navy, recognizing that I'm going to be drafted as soon as I got out of college, or shortly thereafter. And I enlisted in the Navy, and the Navy did some research on me, and it took time to get me admitted into the Navy. And what it amounted to was that I was separated. Well, I was picked out of a group of about 600 people, or about 500 or 50 of us, that were taken into the intelligence section of the Navy.
So
Naval
you
Air.
spent the Korean War and some time after that as an intelligence officer
Yes.
in the United States Navy. And what exactly does an intelligence officer do? A lot of things.
A lot of things.
Okay.
And many. This was air intelligence, and what we were being trained to do was to brief fighter bombers in the Navy that flew out into landed on the aircraft carriers and went off on missions, and then came back, and we briefed them, told them everything they had to know, and some of the things they shouldn't do and shouldn't be around. So that's what we did.
So basically you were training pilots in certain aspects of their job as pilots.
Right.
You mentioned before, like recognizing different planes from their silhouettes,
Right.
and recognizing features on the ground and things of that sort. Is that
Yes.
right?
So
Okay.
it'd be the things that they had a good chance of running into or using it, and we just brought them up to date with pictures and warnings and suggestions. We did everything but not fly the plane.
And then you went on to teach other intelligence officers.
My first trip out, I was in a jet fighter squadron, the only non-aviator in the group. And when we came back into port after being out about 6 months, I was sent back to Washington to teach at the school that I had just graduated from before I went to Korea.
Okay. To move along,
All right.
you were discharged from the Navy in 1956.
Yeah,
and
one more
One more
assignment
story.
in
Oh.
Japan, working with long-range search planes for the Navy all along the coast of Russia, China, so forth.
Okay. And then when you were discharged, you worked for Owens Illinois Glass Company in marketing.
Right.
And you went around to pharmacies and drugstores and whatnot and marketed glass products.
Right.
In fact, Ted might have a few of your bottles, glass bottles, in his room.
I've never really asked them about that, haven't I, Ted?
A whole display of them, Bob.
So
Oh.
you'll have to have a guided tour.
Oh, we'll put in another unit like this, and I'll tell them how to pick the glassware. How's that?
That sounds good. And after about 2.5 years at that, you really kind of wanted to move on into business. And you had a little stint in Harvard, not too long.
Yeah.
I couldn't get any really good stories out of you about Harvard, so we'll just leave that.
All the good stories have been told.
All the good stories have been told. But then you wanted to get into a career in California.
Yes.
And your doctor brother, Dr. Jim, was instrumental in getting you out here and located out here. Any stories about that?
No, but my Navy experience was all out here, other than the school in Washington, was all out here. So I had been to San Francisco and airfields up in that area, and also down in Los Angeles and
Mhm.
San Diego.
So your brother kind of got you settled here in Westwood.
Yes.
And you described the company that you worked for as high tech. Now, at that time, high tech was more or less what we would call aerospace.
That's what it was called about the time I came in, but it rolled to being more aerospace, high tech.
Yeah, and you had something to do with the manuals that people needed to put the gizmos together and to operate the stuff, right?
Right.
And tell us about that.
Well, I had a BA a degree in college. I was not technical at all, and those were limitations going to work in a high-tech company. But they had a division in this one company that I ran across that was trying to build up a division in their company to prepare the documentation that's required to ship out in a crate or a big piece of machinery. Everything that you sent out the door, you had to have written descriptions of how you receive it, how you unpack it, how you check it out, how this, how that, and that was required for all the equipment that the government or the industry was looking for, and not many people knew how to do it. And I ran across one company that said, "You're the man we're looking for. We've got 170 people that we have in a department that do nothing but try to keep up with the changes and all the documentations of the equipment that we have, and we're doing it on a subcontract basis. We'd like somebody to go out and do that." In other words, supply assistance for equipment that we didn't make and had nothing to do with, but we could go in and write up the delivery documentation to help that company do it. And I called on all the major companies in the United States to do that, the top 10 or 15.
So after a certain time of that, you went more into the investment business and worked for a number of firms, which we don't necessarily have to detail all of them. But ended up with what, Northwestern Mutual is what I recall. And for about the last 25 years of your career, you served very frequently as an expert witness in securities cases.
I got into a situation where I could do some marketing. Marketing is the term I use rather than selling. Marketing was a bigger job. You had to identify what you're going to do. You had to figure out how it would be transported and how it would be this and that. And I've lost my thought here. What was the last thing you said?
Well, moving from obviously securities, working in securities and investments is also a sort of brand of marketing, isn't it?
Oh, sure. Thank you. I was trying to figure out how I'd get from one point to another. I have slowed down a lot. Thank you for your patience.
That's okay. We all have.
I decided it would be more fun in the securities business, and that's when I got tied up with Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, and I didn't sell much insurance, but I helped them internally and organized some things, and I didn't do a lot of traveling then, and that was something I enjoyed, but it got to be too much, so I stayed in house quite a bit. But I got I was approached by somebody in the government about being an expert witness to help us with the problems that people around the United States have with broker-dealers, where the service that the individual has received has been inaccurate, misrepresented, all sorts of things that you could file a suit and try and recover the money. Well, I'd been in that business for a number of years, and I understood it quite well. So the government, actually, a friend of mine that I knew, said, I think you should be doing expert witness work. So I did less selling, and I began analyzing cases for the NASD, the National Association of Securities Dealers at that time, and looking at cases that have been filed but not decided how they were going to approach and solve them, set them up for further formal activity to settle the job.
So in other words, if somebody invests money and they lose their money and they feel that they haven't been served well by their investment broker, naturally the first thing they're going to do is sue them.
Sure.
And then the investment broker needs somebody to defend them and maybe settle out of court, maybe go to court. But you mostly worked on the side of the investment brokers, or did you work on the side of the plaintiff?
I worked mostly on the plaintiff side.
On the plaintiff side.
Yeah, that's
So-
more fun.
That's more fun. Okay. Probably so. But you said that you probably handled 500 to 600 cases
Yes.
where you served in the court or in the arbitration as
court or arbitration.
as a witness, as one who basically says, well, this is what the situation is, and this is the way it's supposed to be.
You know, given the fundamentals of the person that is concerned, I would want to make a good analysis of their situation in terms of their ability to handle the risk they're about to take. And I did that for up until
Good.
about 10 years ago.
Now, you retired sometime in the early 2000s, and you told me that you had some goals for retirement, that you wanted to do some travel. And you came here instead.
I thought,
Have we fulfilled your goals?
yeah, oh yeah, oh yes, yeah. No,
Oh.
I fulfilled my goal.
All right.
I had enough traveling.
So you've been happy here.
Very, yes.
All right.
I have relatives that, well, my brother was here in Los Angeles. He was a doctor, open heart surgeon, and he set up that department at UCLA and was there for the rest of his life.
That was Jim.
Jim, yeah. So I had
Jim Maloney.
a couple of
Okay.
people around that I could.
All right. To conclude, because we are now only 5 minutes over, but is there any parting word that you might like to leave with your friends here at Nazareth House? Anything? Now is your chance.
You know, I will ask you to forgive me for not being able to be a little direct in my discussions with you. I just can't handle it that well anymore. And I will give you the classic example when the when the waitress comes in to give me comes up to me in the dining room and said, "What would you like this morning?" I cannot remember what I had for breakfast that I can call out to. And I had the same thing every morning, and I still stumbled over it.
That's okay. Natalie knows. Natalie knows.
Natalie knows, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions that any of you might have for Bob?
Pardon?
Yes.
Well, I think
Dan.
I asked him where he got those nice white pants that he wears, and he said he got them for sailing with his brother in the Caribbean.
You got those nice white pants sailing with your brother in the Caribbean.
Yes,
All right.
I did. Did a lot of that. I did once a year. I'd be down in the Caribbean with him. Yeah, and I've forgotten where I bought them, but they're like iron. I wear them frankly for about 6 days, and they're wrinkled, but they're not dirty. So I throw them in the wash and start over again. I have to have a standby pair of pants though in the meantime.
Don't we all? Okay, well, thank you very much, Bob.
Nice to
And
see
God
you.
bless you. And this was a great experience. You were fantastic. Thank you. Okay, one more. Richard.
There are two things I think that the fellow residents would enjoy hearing about. One was a well-known date that you had in college, and the
What is-
other is, I've forgotten.
A
Okay.
well-known date in college?
Yes.
A well-known date.
A well-known date in college.
Oh, I was.
That
I'll see if I can remember. Yeah, Grace Kelly.
Grace Kelly.
Yeah, it was Grace Kelly. She wasn't. I was introduced to her by her brother. She used to come down and watch us row, and I took her out a few times. She was a really fun girl. And then she went up to New York and got on the stage and went out to Hollywood and was in a couple of pictures out there, and then she got married. So
Yeah. Well, okay. So let it be at that. So thank you again, Bob.
thank you.
God bless.